Nathan Jurevicius is an Australian award-winning artist that embodies every expression of the word artist, from publications, galleries, a vinyl toy range, graphic novel, online games, and now an animated feature film. To save her father and the destruction of her planet, Aki must overcome her fears and journey to the fantastical city of light. Scarygirl is in Australian cinemas from October 26th. Nathan, thank you so much and welcome to the For Your Reference podcast.
Thanks so much. It's lovely to be here.
It's so nice to be able to chat today, and I'm so excited to talk about the film. There's aesthetically, there's a lot to talk about, even the themes as well. But I think even before we come to that, I kind of just want to talk about the Scarygirl IP in general. This is a decades-long legacy, that you've had with Scarygirl, going from 2D to game animation to a feature film. I would love to know, living in the world and in the IP and in the characters, did you feel like there was more to learn about Aki and the world?
Yeah, absolutely. There's always been different stories being told through the different mediums. Mm-hmm. And with this film, it was a new story. I hadn't actually told this story before because we didn't really know a lot about her exact journey from other mediums. It was always, it was a silent graphic novel, so there wasn't words. The game had a different kind of focus, and so this film is really a new take on the story, and it's a new take on even her aesthetically. She's actually quite different looking to what she was, 21 years ago. So there was new stories, and I think there's a lot more stories to tell of her as well. You're only touching the surface of exactly where she came from, and
are we getting a cinematic universe?
Maybe, yeah. No, there's definitely kind of a multiverse style thing that's going on here, and you'll see that like each one has its own take. I always look at it as a bit of a how would you put it? An open source type story where collaborators come in and they reinterpret the story based on a very sort of thin thread of what needs to happen. But after the thin thread is kind of essentially tied up, the contributor can kind of go anywhere they want on it, as far as, this character's now bad, this character's good. Maybe we'll do this halfway through. Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting that you say open source, because eventually I do want to talk about the themes in Scarygirl and, the whole machine versus nature sort of conversation. So I guess that's just a little tantalizing on the way in our chat. But I think before we get to that, I think what impressed me the most was how visually delicious this film was. It had such a visual language to it, from the colors to the textures and the way that the film was layered. And, even the different sort of worlds that we would have inside of Scarygirl had a different sort of color aesthetic. I want to talk a little bit about, I guess, the visual language and the journey into translating that into an animated film.
Yeah, I mean, with the world of Scarygirl, I do like to kind of, I suppose, pocket each environment with a very specific like color palette. And especially with the film is really broken up, I would say, into kind of three color palettes. You have the peninsula, where things are quite I suppose non-machine like. Then you've got the forest area, which is it's like a combination between the city and the peninsula, as far as kind of the atmosphere of being a little bit more grungier, darker. Yeah. And then you've got the city atmosphere, which is a very kind of blues and purples, which is quite a contrast between the peninsula. And so looking at the world, you can kind of, if you look at the movie on almost like a timeline, you can see the strong progression of the colors of it being kind of sort of sunny to kind of this really kind of purpley bluey environment. And what's interesting is that the sun is also being affected during the film. So as the sun gets affected, the sky is actually becoming red. And so when you look outside, you'll actually see over the course of the film a redness to the sky, which affects the interiors of the city as well. And so you're getting this really lovely kind of, I suppose, ominous red tones hitting all the characters once we get to the city. And then that changes at the very end when the sun is back to its sort of almost good state. So it's really interesting to kind of break up the worlds in colors. Colors become fairly naturally, and I love kind of breaking up all my work into kind of very specific color palettes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's so interesting. Is it a conscious thing though? Because I imagine, artists just close their eyes and then they just paint around and it just automatically creates it that way. Or is it more of a methodical, like how was it being able to be like, this world is this world is that? Was it more methodical or was it more free flowing?
For the film, there was definitely a method to it. It was, I mean, a lot of my work that I do normally just as an artist is more free flowing, but often there's a focal point. So with the film, I do have a very specific kind of color focal point, and so we will break up the film in that way. So, with the city, for instance, we were always looking at kind of blue tones and red tones as kind of like the key colors to that city, and so everything was kind of based around that color palette for the city. For the peninsula, we're looking at kind of a lot more earthy tones. So there's lovely browns and kind of greens that you actually don't really see much in the city at all. And so it's a real contrast. And we had to be specific because in order to show the contrast between the worlds and how the world was getting more affected the closer you got to technology, the further away from technology, it became more natural.
I also love because, all cultures around the world, or even just in general, this sort of sedentary sort of life that we have, people crave the sun, people crave being out into nature. And that really played a really core theme. And I really appreciated that in Scarygirl. I think, talking about the texture and, even the mood and the tonality of Scarygirl, it was really underscored, if you'll pardon the pun, by the sound design and also the score in the film. What was it like working towards the mood and the tone, and I guess even the plot throughout the film of we visually have it, how do we, I guess, add that extra sort of seasoning through the sound?
Yeah, I mean, the sound is one of my favorite aspects of the film. The sound design, the music. I mean, the composer, was brilliant. Like we had a kind of a brief for him that we wanted to kind of bring about throughout the different, areas of the film. And he was able to kind of interpret those areas through various mood boards that we'd done. And there's a lot of nature and kind of hand-built sounds that come into the peninsula and the forest as well. So when you listen to it, you can kind of the brief to Ak was like, imagine the Scarygirl world has its own band. What instruments would they play? What natural objects would you find in that environment that could be used as instruments? And so the composer really took that to heart and brought that sound and sound design into the different musical beats throughout the film. And then as it gets more machine-like, it becomes more synth-based. There's a lot more of that kind of beautiful, I suppose, 80s retro vibe that comes into it. And then when there's a crossover between nature and the machine world, what Ak did is he brought in some of the natural music sounds and then overlaid them with the synth. And so you had this really lovely merging of technology and nature in the sound design.
It sounds like a very cohesive team. Like I love the way you were able to play together and really, because it really does come out in Scarygirl, especially for myself as well as audiences in general. Scarygirl is, probably most targeted towards younger audiences, but there's still enough for, adults to be able to watch and be able to digest in different sort of levels as well. What was it like? Because you also talked about how the graphic novel was silent. So I guess, even bringing motivations of characters to create an animated film and that sort of thing. What was it like balancing story, making sure that it had enough obstacles, but also making sure it could resonate on all levels, including younger audiences?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one with the story because it is definitely focused at a younger audience, and it's probably the first time that I've done something that that's more for that kind of, say 6 to 11-year-old audience. So there's a lot of themes that can resonate with that younger crowd.
Mm-hmm.
But it was an interesting process because, how I suppose, dark do we make this? Do we kind of bring in this kind of real menacing aspect, or do we have to kind of like make that more subtle, where adults can kind of understand that this is actually quite a scary moment, but it's not so scary that a kid will freak out and want to run out of the room. So it's doing that fine balance. And I mean, the writers did a good job of balancing it, and it's hard, it's very tricky. It's very tricky when you're trying to make something it's an indie film, so you don't necessarily have so much of the restrictions of a studio picture, but it's also an indie film, and we want an audience as well. So you've got that whole thing of like, we don't want it to be so obscure and so weird that only a small percentage will ever enjoy it. Yeah,
and their little letterbox like review.
Yeah, exactly. It's so hard. So, story is really it's a difficult one. I mean, most of my concentration on the film was production design and character design. But of course, being a very small, very tight group of people making it, you had to kind of do multiple roles and review things. And the story was something that morphed over the time of making the film as well. There were certain things, that happened at the end of the film. Even the resolution of what happens to Dr. Maybe at the end was still being worked out, because there was one option or there was another option. And did we want to think about whether Dr. Maybe has a life beyond the film? And that was the decision that we went through. Was
hand coming out of the grave.
Exactly. So we kind of wanted to give him that, no, there could be a story about Dr. Maybe later on. Let's not kind of like eradicate that character from the film. So there was a lot of thought about future stories being told from this film.
We kind of already touched on it, but I guess if you wanted to add some extra comments, there was the talking about environmentalism, and I was like, oh, did we do a capitalism as well? And it was like machines versus nature, and I guess that talks about like the textures and also animations as well. Hayao Miyazaki, 2D, the Oppenheimers of it all with, as practical as possible. Is there anything in regards to, I guess, the layering of, and even sort of parenthood as well, is there anything in the layering of the themes that you felt like you were able to put into there? Because I personally, I think this film achieved what a lot of younger geared sort of films don't do. It was able to achieve so much.
Yeah. I mean, for me, as far as story and themes go, I think the biggest thing for me and the most personal was the family aspect, the idea of like, what is your family? Like, do they have to actually be, blood related to be family? Is family, essentially kind of what you make of it? Is it who actually, brings you up and loves you? And also understanding expectations of being, say, a parent with a kid. I mean, I've got 3 kids that are, grown up now. They're in their, 20s now, but they're, as a parent, you kind of want them to go a certain direction, even though you don't specifically say you must be this. In your head, you're always kind of got these hopes and dreams for your children. And that plays out a lot in the film, where it's kind of like, what does a parent want for their kid, and they think they've got the potential for. And sometimes you don't listen to your kids, what they actually want and what they're actually skilled at. And and I think Scarygirl really brings that about, where you've got this young girl who's like actually got skills, but it goes against what the parent wants. And it's not even a bad thing that what the parent wants. I mean, what the kid wants. It's just that it's not what the parent.
It's that conflict.
Yeah, that conflict. And so I think that's a really good. It's a really interesting theme to think about as a parent. And that plays out a lot in the film. I mean, it's things where sometimes you have to take the best bits of a bad situation sometimes.
I'm going to wrap up with our final question. I'm so sad we didn't get to talk about the casting and the voice actors. Gillian Nguyen, Remy Hee, Rob Collins, Deborah Melman, Mark Cole Smith, and Sam Neill. Like, we don't have time, but I just needed to do a baby shout out. We finish off our reviews with a recommendation. So what would you pair with Scarygirl as a double feature?
I mean, I love James and the Giant Peach, the stop motion film by Henry Selick. Brilliant. I think those two films would work wonders as a double feature.
Gorgeous. Love that. Thank you so much, Nathan. I really appreciate your time.
Lovely to speak to you too. Yeah. Cheers. Thank you so much.
No worries. Talk soon. Bye.
Bye.